This episode of the Savvy Dentist podcast is proudly brought to you by Clear Aligner Excellence. Market data shows that over the next 6 years, the clear aligner market in Australia will grow by a whopping 29%. That's a huge uplift in aligners, and what we know is there's an opportunity for dental practices to be able to capitalize on that trend. Clear Aligner Excellence is a business that has been designed to help dental practices capitalize on that by helping install proven turnkey systems. These systems are designed to maximize clinical efficiency and outcomes, to accelerate and increase the number of new patient starts, and of course to reduce the overhead of the practice and to increase profits. If this is something that you'd like to take advantage of in your practice, all you need to do is head across to clearex, clearex.com.au/dentists and register your interest.
Welcome to the Savvy Dentist podcast with Dr. Jesse Green, the show where great dentistry meets great business. Listen in each week as we bring you an inspiring person who will share their story, ideas and business techniques to help you create a practice and a life you love. And now introducing your host, Dr. Jesse Green.
Hello everyone, it's Jesse Green here. Welcome back to SavvyDentist.com and to the Savvy Dentist podcast. It is great to have you here. And in particular, I'd like to welcome you to our summer series where we bring you some of the very best of the Savvy Dentist podcast moments. Now, over the past 6 years, we've had the chance to interview and work with countless entrepreneurs, athletes, speakers, authors, and a heap of international experts and really finding out what makes them tick. And in particular, how to take those lessons and apply them to your dental practice. And in this episode, we're going to be bringing you the best of business intelligence. So we know that we can learn a lot from other industries, other business models, and indeed the rapid innovation that we're currently seeing in how we do business across these industries. So we're going to be distilling the lessons from business icons and business luminaries so you can apply them in your own practice. So in this part of the summer series, we're going to be sharing with some wisdom from some great guests that we know you're going to enjoy. So as always, have a pen and paper handy because there's some pearls of wisdom coming for you right now. Pete Williams was my guest in episode 331, where we spoke about fast business growth. We identified 7 levers that drive any business and how to apply them across your business, irrespective of the industry that you're in. Now, when you look at these levers and you apply gains at even just 10% across these levers, you get massive compounding for huge gains across the business as a whole. So lots of great stuff in this episode from Pete. Let's get into it. There are 7 levers that you speak about in your book, and obviously we're looking for aggregated incremental gains across those 7 areas, right?
Yeah.
So I'm wondering if you can give us a bit of an overview, a high-level overview, then perhaps deep dive into 1 or 2 of those just to explore a bit further down there. Could you just give us a bit of an overview around that?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is the framework to develop that of our companies. We've had our companies for about 15 years now. Our group kind of has grown in different spaces, from e-com to services to product sales. We've got quite a bit of a breadth of offerings, and we've kind of been proven this model throughout all these areas. So basically what we've kind of discovered is there's really only 7 things that drive in any business. Whether dentist, whether you're an e-commerce store, whether you're a retailer, whether you run a consulting business, no matter what it is, there's these 7 areas that basically drive profit. And we kind of figure these out over time, and we're kind of realizing we're hitting glass ceilings or our revenue is stagnant or whatever it might be. So effectively, and some of this stuff might not be mind-blowing, but the question I want to suggest to people as they listen to this firstly is just ask yourself the question is, are you spending time specifically focused on each of these 7 areas and looking at how do you influence or grow each of these areas in isolation? Because these are the things you can focus on. And if you focus and tweak these, this is where you get the growth. And we can talk about that in a moment. But fundamentally, so first is suspects. How many people are actually finding out about your business? These are the suspects, people who first hear about your business. They might visit your website. If you're a retail store, it's people who walk into the store. It's some sort of first engagement. So that's your marketing, really. How do you get your awareness to your business to expand? Then the second lever is prospects. And this is basically the percentage of suspects that actually do engage with your business. They take some sort of micro commitment to move towards a purchase, but haven't quite purchased yet. So if we sort of go analog for a moment and think of a footwear store, it's someone who sits down and tries on a pair of shoes, takes a test drive at the dealership, requests a quote for a phone system solution, or maybe, books an appointment. Potentially could be the way you could describe a prospect for a dentist.
Yep.
So, the way you take that suspect who kind of first sees about you and encourages them to take a micro commitment is a specific action you can control that will drive more revenue through your business.
Yes.
The third lever is conversion. So how many people who take that micro commitment or become a prospect move forward to actually purchase from you? So they actually, decide to say, yep, I'm going to turn up to my appointment. I'm going to buy the car I've test drove. I'm going to buy the pair of shoes I tried on, whatever it might be. So you've got suspects, prospects, and conversions. So 3 very distinct steps that customers take that you can control. Then when it comes to revenue, you've got average item price and average items per sale. So this is for the products and services you sell. What is the average price that you charge for this? And how can you increase the value, therefore charge a higher price for the services you offer? And when it comes to items per sale, how do you get people to buy the pair of socks with a pair of shoes, the window tinting with the car, the crowns with the teeth, or the whitening package, or the electric toothbrush that you sell at the front desk, or whatever else that you guys, I was going to say shove down our throats, which is probably a good or bad analogy. I'm not quite sure.
Yeah, well, it's good. I like it. It's good.
So you've got the average item price and average items per sale. And these are, again, 2 things you can distinctly focus on and change the outcomes in your business. You've got transactions per client. This is the 6th lever. So this is how often do people come back and transact with you again. Now, I know in dentistry, for most dentists, you would absolutely argue hand on heart that most clients don't come back as often as they need to get their checkups. So what are you proactively doing to drive that and, control that outcome and not just wait for someone to come back and rebook? And then finally, got your margins. How do you manage the cost, manage the productivity, manage the efficiency in your business? So they're the 7 levers. You've got suspects, prospects, conversions, average item price, average items per sale, transactions, and margins/expenses. And again, you look at that and go, oh, yeah, okay, I've probably heard these terms before, nothing overly new. But I struggle to find a business owner that is actually proactively looking and measuring at all these things individually, because really they're the only things that drive revenue and profit in a business. So if you're not regularly focused on these 7 areas, thinking, okay, how this month am I going to try and increase our suspects? What am I going to do this month to actually try and improve the amount of clients who come back and repeat business with us, transactions? What am I doing to make sure we get clients to buy more items? How do we get them to buy the toothpaste, the toothbrush, the whitening service, the whatever else that you guys can offer that can increase the amount of items or services someone does when they come into your practice with an appointment? And they're the things we should be focusing on, because the crazy thing that really blew our mind when we kind of stumbled on this, we stumbled on that because in our business, one of our first companies was a telecommunications business that sold phone systems all around Australia. But we didn't have technicians. So we were generating the leads, making the sale, and then literally kind of basically giving the client to a competitor, subcontractor, to actually do the installation, because we didn't have the tech team. And that was great for us, but then we realized over time that where revenue was hitting this class and we weren't growing. So we kind of started to dive through the numbers and work out what the problem was, and we realized we were never getting any repeat business because we were literally giving the client to a subcontractor. So when the client wanted to expand their system or make some programming changes, they weren't going to call us. They were calling the person who actually turned up and did the actual installation and gave them the real, quality service. And that was kind of our awareness going, oh yeah, transactions, we should really do something about this. And we changed our focus. So that was kind of how this whole developed in terms of these 7 areas, and we do focus on these things regularly with our teams. But the crazy thing from that is we started playing with it and looking at it, is we realized this aggregated marginal gains approach actually applies here. And it blew our mind the way it does. In that if you increase each of these 7 areas by just 10%, so let's say you've got 1,000 people coming to your website a month. You do some tweaks to your AdWords campaign, you do a little bit of SEO, maybe you do a small radio commercial, you do Google Places, whatever it might be. I'm sure there's plenty of advice that you guys give through the program to clients that can help them increase their suspects, their web traffic, whatever it might be. So you go from 1,000 to 1,100, just a small 10% win. And you work through each of the levers, and maybe you put an SMS system in place, or you tweak the wording of the SMS that reminds people to come back and book again. Or you encourage clients that if they booked their next appointment today, they might get a free toothpaste tube or something. I don't know. But something to increase transactions per client, encourage them to do that. So you just do these little tweaks that improve those things by 10%. The crazy cumulative effect of that is it actually doubles your profit. the mathematics, it's just basic maths. It's not like, oh, this is pie in the sky or we're trying to make outlandish promises. Just mathematically, 7 small 10% increases in each of these areas actually doubles your profit. So when we kind of realized that, not only did we understand that, oh, these 7 areas was interesting and helpful, but it just changed the scope of what our goals became in our business and where we focus. So literally the way we run our businesses now is we're saying, okay, effectively every month we're picking one lever and we're going to work on how do we get a 10% increase in that. We're going to relook at our proposals. We're going to look at the way our receptionist takes the bookings. We're going to put in a system to make sure we send reminders or phone calls to clients to make sure they actually turn up for their appointment. We get more prospects actually appearing for their booked appointment, whatever it might be. We're going to look at ways we can, encourage clients to actually buy the extra add-on or service that we sell with our solutions. And that is just what we do one month. January, we're doing suspects, hypothetically, 10% win. February, we're going to try and increase our prospects, 10% win. So effectively, every 7 months, we are continually doubling our profit. And that cadence and that rhythm of focus that you spoke about earlier is what drives our fast growth, because every 7 months, we're effectively doubling the profit of our business, and it just scales from there, which is just phenomenal. And that's the thing that, it's achievable. It's like 10% wins are achievable. We're not trying to be Babe Ruth and go, we're going to whack here and go from 1,000 to 5,000 new suspects. We're not going to double your conversion rate tomorrow. We're not going to get twice as many people coming back, because those things are hard to do. But a 10% increase, that's achievable. It gives you confidence. And I think the biggest thing is the confidence of that 10% ability to be achieved actually makes you get to work.
Perhaps one of my favorite entrepreneurs on the planet is Jeff Bezos from Amazon. And in episode 301, Steve Anderson, the author of the Bezos Letters, joined me for a conversation about the lessons that each of us can take from Amazon and its growth. Now, particularly, we spoke about decision making and how Jeff Bezos is able to make high impact, irreversible decisions even with incomplete information. And what that led to was a discussion about the different types of decisions that business owners need to make and the different processes we need to have at our disposal in order to make sound decisions. We also understood, though, that sometimes we make the wrong decisions and that sometimes we fail, and failure is acceptable. And at Amazon, failure is even encouraged, because we want to turn that failure into an ultimate success. So we discussed that as well. Plenty of good stuff in this episode. Enjoy this from Steve Anderson.
So my question for you is this, is how do you make good decisions with incomplete information and manage the risk around that?
So that goes into a principle in the accelerate phase called generate high velocity decisions. So Bezos talks a lot about decision making at Amazon. And he describes it as doors and types. So type 1 decisions are, again, his words, a one-way door. They're big decisions. They're like an acquisition of a new company, or they're hard to reverse.
Yep.
And he said those decisions should be made slowly with lots of data and probably ultimately gut and intuition.
Mm-hmm.
He said, but most business decisions are not type 1. They're type 2. Type 2 decisions are reversible or two-way doors. So if we make a decision to move forward, do something, and we don't like what we see once we pass through that decision door, we can just either pivot to a different decision or turn around and just say, nope, we're not going to do that. Let's shut it down. They're not consequential in the short term, but they could be consequential in the longer term. And he said the problem is that when companies get bigger, they tend to make type 2 decisions with a type 1 process, which means they slow down their growth.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And that's the idea of a company getting bigger and bigger and having multiple layers of approval process and, supervisor to department head to regional head to something like that. And he said that slows things down. And Amazon has had an amazing ability to keep those decisions that should be made by a small group of highly qualified people at that level and not force them to move up in hierarchy. And it's because failure is okay at Amazon. In fact, it's encouraged. Again, that's one of the principles in the test phase, which is encourage successful failure.
What is successful failure? Is that being able to take a lesson away from it? Is that what they would deem as successful failure?
Yeah.
Learning?
And you had mentioned earlier something along the lines of acceptable failure and unacceptable failure. And what I always try and make sure people understand is Amazon has an intolerance for incompetence. So it is not about not being a competent person and just doing something that didn't work. And actually, Bezos describes it as kind of two different areas. Operational failure is bad, meaning his example was, we've built the 200 fulfillment centers. We know how to build a fulfillment center today. If we build a fulfillment center and it doesn't work right, that is not okay. But if we're testing a new product and it doesn't work the way we thought, what can we learn from it? And again, the example I use in the book, and I think one of the better examples, is the Amazon Fire Phone. And this was Bezos' pet project.
Yes.
He headed it up, actually. So he thought the world needed a phone that was from Amazon to make it easier to shop on Amazon. Now, this was 2014.
Yeah, I remember it.
The iPhone had been out, right, 2007. Android phones were already there. Who needed another phone? Well, nobody. It ended up being, in fact, at one point, Amazon lowered the price to 99 cents and couldn't give them away. So at the end of 2014, they wrote off $178 million in development and inventory costs as a failure, shut the project down. It was gone. However, so that was a failure, one of the bigger ones.
Yep.
But 4 months after Bezos announced the Fire Phone, he got his first demonstration of a device that would sit on a table and that you could actually talk to, and it would answer you, right? What we have come to know as Alexa and the Echo hardware, and Alexa, the machine learning platform. The voice processing and a whole bunch of tools, techniques that they learned with the phone, they were able to transfer into the Echo platform, and obviously a pretty big success. So he says there are lots of experiments and failures we need to go through in order to figure out what the right mix of product, user interface, and one of my favorite phrases he uses is, we invent on behalf of the customer.
I was unfamiliar with the phrase competitive intelligence until I met Babette Bensoussan, and she joined me in episode 189 to discuss just that. In the episode, we discussed what competitive intelligence actually is, and it turns out that it's a process for gathering and analysing information so that we can derive insights that support our business objectives and our decision-making process. Now, clearly this is important because if we get this right, we're going to not just understand the data, we're going to be able to use the data and ultimately create a competitive advantage for our practice. So this is a great episode if you want to learn how to think and analyze data and use it productively and well. So here's Babette.
So most people, when you hear the words competitive intelligence, hear competitors. Now, competitive intelligence is about your competitive ability. How competitive are you? Now, if you just look at one area of the market, which is your competitors, sadly, if you do that, you don't see any of the disruptors that come along. So did taxi companies who did their competitive intelligence, quote, look at Uber? Or did hotels and hospitality look at Airbnb? You wouldn't look at them because they're not your competitors.
Yes.
Okay? So what happens is competitive intelligence is a process for gathering and analyzing information in order to derive insights to support your business objectives. So if you look at the factors that impact a dental practice, your biggest competitive issue and that you need to monitor the closest is the government. Why do I say government?
Because of regulatory policy, because they make the rules, Medicare.
The rebates.
Yep, all of that. And
so
they control the playing field.
Yes. So technology, how it can impact dentistry and make it easier for the patients. You've got Medicare and government legislation. So when you're looking at your competitive ability, you need to understand all of that, not just competitors. If you're looking at other dentists, forget it. Yeah. You're lost because they're already doing the same as you.
In episode 71, I was joined by Aynsley Damery. Now, I had the really good fortune of meeting Aynsley when we both travelled to Necker Island to meet Sir Richard Branson. We had a great time together, and what struck me about Aynsley is not only is he a really smart entrepreneur and business guy, he's got an incredible heart and does so much good in the world. In the episode that we recorded together, Aynsley was really passionate about identifying the common mistakes small business make, but particularly why they make them. We also spoke a lot about technology, synthesizing data. We spoke about competition and the need to stand out from the crowd. And to do that, the importance of creating an experience that's coupled with the technological advances. Some really good insights from a really smart business guy. I'll leave you with Aynsley.
We've seen a dramatic change in the way business is done in the last 5 years. And it's just not about technology, you know. There's been a huge amount of small businesses in the UK, and I guess the same in Australia as well. And so we've seen, massive amount of businesses and competition setting up, and there's been a huge downward pressure on pricing. And I think a lot of my clients are finding it really, really difficult to stand out from the crowd, and they don't know how to do that. So I think just setting the scene, from that perspective, past where if you adopted best practice and you operated really, really well, you're almost guaranteed success. And I think nowadays, just doing those things will get you to the starting line. Everybody now is looking for more. They're looking for an experience. They're looking for, outstanding customer service. They're looking for understanding. They're looking for love, I suppose. And so the rules of business have changed, I think, a lot. And I think small business owners sometimes don't see that. They see it when they go out to a restaurant. And I don't know you got way better food than we have in the UK. I mean, in 10 years has been a dramatic change in restaurant business in the UK. You used to go out to a restaurant, and if you got a good meal, you were thinking, crikey, that was good. Whereas nowadays you're thinking, no, the good food is just the start. I now want to have an experience. I want to feel like it's a great night out. And I think business owners kind of forget that from their own perspective and from their own customers' perspective. So I think that I kind of just wanted to set that scene, first of all. The first, I think, and the biggest mistake that we see with most small business owners is that they just don't plan. And oftentimes they say to me, it's because we don't know what's going to happen in the future, Aynsley. Our business is up and down. We can't tell what's going to happen from one day to the next. So how could we possibly plan? And I think they maybe have come from the corporate world and they think, I did planning and I was subject to budgets and all that sort of stuff then. And I want to do things differently. I want a free flow and see how it goes. And I think it's just really, really foolish. I think, I see my clients sometimes spend more time planning a holiday than I see them planning their business. And I think it's just reckless. So I think not planning is one of the key critical mistakes that most small business owners make. And I think as well, a lot of them tend to just think, okay, so if I do plan, I'll take last year plus 5%. And all they're really doing there is just taking all the inherent issues and problems and results and everything that was happening in the business last year and saying, we're going to do it again, rather than just ripping it up and saying, okay, so what could we do? How could we achieve those results? What activities would we need to do to make that happen? So I think, planning is a really, really critical area in business that most people just completely ignore.
There's so much wisdom you've shared already, Aynsley, and I just wanted to come back to the point, the context you shared earlier about how business has changed so rapidly in the last 5 years, and I couldn't agree with you more. In dentistry, it's interesting. I was looking at the ABC website, our equivalent to the BBC, and there was a news article which was talking about the increasing influence of medical insurance companies, corporatization of dentistry, and it's not just dentistry, of course. There's other businesses going or other professions going down a similar path, or whether it's robotics or even driverless cars. The things are certainly changing, and I agree wholeheartedly. There was a time when you could just put your shingle up on the door, do a good job, and you'd be okay. But now people need to be effective business owners, not just professionals at what they do. But the planning piece, Aynsley, I'm really interested to just tap into, because someone listening to the podcast will go, okay, I get it, I need to plan. What do you see as the fundamental elements that make up a good plan? What should people be considering as they put their plan together?
I think it's really important that they understand why they're doing it. So what are they trying to achieve? I know we're probably sick to death of hearing about Simon Sinek. And, I'm sure most of your dentists will have, seen Start With Why and various other things. So I'm just going a little bit further than that. It's understanding what you're trying to achieve out of your business. And we kind of really start with kind of a 5-year plan. So we look at maybe 5 is an easy number. 7 sometimes gets a little bit, from a brain perspective, is hard to visualize. But if we say in 5 years' time, what are you looking for? What are you looking to achieve? What do you want to do personally? What do you want from the business? What does the business need to provide for you to enable that to happen? And so if we start with that 5-year plan and at that 5-year journey, and then say, okay, so what do we need to be doing from an income perspective? What are our costs in 5 years' time? How is that going to enable that profit to be made, to be able to take the salary that you really need from the business to enable all the things that you want to do? And so we know where we are now. We know where we want to be in 5 years' time. And it's about planning a route map from where we are here to where we want to get to. And I think most people say, yeah, but I don't know what's going to happen in 5 years. And that's not really the point. If we create a route map from now to 5 years, and that gives us a detailed 12-month budget with a whole set of activities and KPIs that we need to achieve on a monthly basis to get to year 1, if we do that, then we're 1/5 of the way on that journey. And, we'll revisit that plan in a year's time. But if we're pushing it forward, then we're actually driving the business towards the 5 years. And there's no magic to this. It's just focusing on what the activities that you need to do to generate the results that actually drives performance.
This episode of the Savvy Dentist podcast is proudly brought to you by Clear Aligner Excellence. Market data shows that over the next 6 years, the clear aligner market in Australia will grow by a whopping 29%. That's a huge uplift in aligners. And what we know is there's an opportunity for dental practices to be able to capitalize on that trend. Clear Aligner Excellence is a business that has been designed to help dental practices capitalize on that by helping install proven turnkey systems. These systems are designed to maximize clinical efficiency and outcomes, to accelerate and increase the number of new patient starts, and of course to reduce the overhead of the practice and to increase profits. If this is something that you'd like to take advantage of in your practice, all you need to do is head across to clearex, clearex.com.au/dentists and register your interest. In episode 64, I was joined by Dr. Mark Costes from the United States, and Mark and I are kindred spirits in many senses because we both think about entrepreneurialism in the same way. When I was growing up as a dentist, to be an entrepreneur was a dirty word. It was, something almost to be ashamed of. Whereas these days, everyone's an entrepreneur. So what Mark spoke about in this episode was, what does it mean to be an entrepreneur or a dentalpreneur in our space? Mark, as a dentist like the rest of us, spent years honing clinical skills, but was never trained in business. And what we spoke about are the essential skills that dentists need to master when it comes to management, leadership, and how to be the CEO of your practice. So these essential entrepreneurial skills are skills that dentists need to master in order to take their practice to the next level. So let's get into it with Mark.
What does dentalpreneur mean to you, and why is that important in today's world, do you think?
Yeah, great question. I think that, any kind of profession, we spend so much time honing our technical skills, our clinical skills in our case, learning how to be physicians of the oral cavity, learning how to be great clinicians. There's barely enough time to get through in the brief period of time that we're in professional school to get out and have the basic skills necessary to treat people and not hurt them, really. There really isn't any time at all to develop the whole other side of our personality. Michael Gerber talks about 3 personalities, the manager, the entrepreneur, and the technician. So the other side of our personality outside of clinician as dentists has to be CEO/entrepreneur. It's a big part of what we're responsible for knowing once we get into business, And I think that the dental part is the clinical part, and the entrepreneur part is really important. And I think a lot of people take for granted the development of the entrepreneur portion of their personality. And I think it's so important, especially nowadays in our competitive market. It's not as it used to be when people would beat a path to your door if you were the best in town. I think there's so many other important aspects to develop in order for people to, patronize you and find you in the first place.
Yeah, look, I think that's really absolutely true. And I'm just curious to ask, Mark, what sort of qualities do you see of an entrepreneur that are essential to dental practice? Do you think it's around innovation? Is it, kind of learning how to build teams, all of the above? What sort of are the essential entrepreneurial skills that you think a dentist needs to be able to bring to their practice?
Yeah, it's great. I mean, I think leadership is probably the number one skill that's necessary, and that's the ability to have difficult conversations, to be able to assess your practice and face the cold, hard facts of the data that you're gathering. I think there's so much basic business knowledge that's lost amongst people that are professionals, accountants, attorneys, physicians, dentists. I think a lot of us take our skills and really believe that development of the skills is the only important thing. The development of our clinical skills is the only important thing. So I do believe that the most important traits for the entrepreneur has to be leadership, the ability to motivate people, the ability to have difficult conversations and make difficult choices, having a very basic knowledge of business and the data that we have to gather and collect, basics about being a persuader and marketer, all important things.
Now, have you always been an entrepreneur, Mark? Is it something that you learned, or is it something that you had innately? I'm curious to understand a little bit about your backstory, because I've been going through all your old blogs and all the, I suppose, the back copies of videos and bits and pieces there. What's your journey been on your path? Has it always been one that's been destined to lead to entrepreneurialism, or is it something you came to later, or what's been that path for you?
Yeah, I think it's kind of in my blood. We have a running joke in our family. My grandmother was the entrepreneur of the family. My mom's mom was the entrepreneur of the family, and she was the best entrepreneur. She owned so many different small businesses. She owned a water company in the Philippines, and she had a car rental company, and she had a catering company. The funniest one was that she was a little bit of a hard money lender, I guess a bit of a loan shark. And my mom always tells the story that she would lend money to people in the neighborhood, and my mom would have to go out and collect the money and the interest on the money. So my mom was the collector, and she said that she always hated that more than anything else. So I think, that kind of ran in our blood. I've been an entrepreneur since before dental school, out of necessity. Took me, it's fairly competitive in the United States, and it is, I know, in Australia as well, to get into dental school. I was a collegiate athlete, and I was diagnosed with, ADD. So I had attention problems, learning disability when I was growing up. So I had a very difficult time getting into dental school. It took me 21 attempts and 3 years to get a single acceptance into dental school. And during that time, after I graduated from my undergraduate program, until I got into my dental program, that was a 3-year span of time, I had a very difficult time finding a corporate job. So I went out and I bought a catering truck franchise. And I don't know if you guys have those in Australia, but it's basically a truck that goes from construction site to fairs or wherever there happens to be people and there's no restaurant or no snack bar available. And I would pull up and honk my horn and flip open my doors. And I had a kitchen in the back, and we would cook, Mexican food and burgers and fries and sell Cokes. And that was my first toe dip into entrepreneurship. And it taught me so much. At the same time, I was getting my MBA. While I was trying to get into dental school, I was getting my MBA at night, my executive MBA. So I was driving the food truck during the day and getting my executive MBA at night. And I learned a lot about management of employees and understanding how to read a P&L and a balance sheet, understanding how to attract new customers and manage employees. So that was, for me, entrepreneurship 101. And when I finally got into dental school, I knew from the beginning that I wanted to be a multiple practice owner. I wanted to focus on the entrepreneurial side of dentistry, as well as developing my clinical suite of skills.
In episode 47, I was joined by Verne Harnish. I have been a fan of Verne's work for many years. He's the author of a couple of fantastic books called Mastering the Rockefeller Habits and, of course, Scaling Up. And in this episode, we spoke about scaling up and why some businesses make it and others just don't. And in this episode, he shares 4 things that separate the businesses that survive from those that don't. Lots of really good things in this episode. Lots of great key insights. If you're a business owner that wants to scale up to earn more and work less, then this is an episode you want to tune into. So let's get into it with Verne.
That is the essence of the book. And we said, you've got to nail 4 big decisions. You've got to get the people right. And you hire the right people, your life is easy. You hire the wrong people, your life is miserable and expensive. It's like not complicated. And then your customers are either happy or not happy, your patients in your case. Number 2, you've got to nail strategy. Are you doing things that actually are highly profitable? In terms of the focus of the practice, the particular customers you go after. And I think most important, if you can get the practice to a point where you're able to say no more than yes, because you get more particular with who it is you want to serve and the services that you're really best at. Then obviously it comes down to number 3, execution. You can sit around and talk about this stuff, but if you can't answer the phones on time and get people seen on time and make sure the treatment's pain-free and, some of those fundamentals, it's going to be tough. And it comes down to just some basic routines of communication that's easy to break down, just being married, the challenges with communication, let alone you get, 10, 20, 30 staff members. And then last, we just got spending some time on cash. You get by with decent people, decent strategy, decent execution, but not a day without cash. And it's not that you're not going to make payroll. I don't think that's really necessarily an issue with most professionals. But do you have the cash to take advantage of opportunities like a location that's come up that you might be able to grab, or a practice that you're able to purchase, or even that equipment that allows you to take the practice to the next level, if it includes, IT that's so critical in being able to automate a lot of the stuff that was manual. So, and that takes cash. It takes money to make money. And so people, strategy, execution, and cash. But the biggie is really internal. It's this thing called ego. If you think you know it all, that's the beginning of the end. I'll tell a quick story of Mark Cuban, who is one of the Shark Tank judges like Naomi Simpson and Glenn Richardson are there in Australia, who, by the way, are both, avid users of Scaling Up and fans of ours. Mark is this iconic, same in the U.S. and owns all these sports teams. And I've known Mark for 30 years. And we asked, one of our audience members asked him a question, what's the biggest mistake you've made and what did you learn from it? And that's kind of a, typical question. And he gave a typical initial answer, which is, hey, I've made a lot of mistakes, which is what you do if you're going to be successful. But then he said something very insightful. But he said there's a fact pattern that behind almost every one of my mistakes, I thought I was the smartest person in the room. And that's when it gets you in trouble. And that's one of our first lessons around people. Your job as a leader is to have no answers. Your job's to get the right question and then find a smarter who. So if I can, I'll give you an example. We just had a bunch of money embezzled from us. This internet scam stuff is real. And about 150,000 of it was shipped to Hong Kong. Well, long story short, the police called us last week and said, hey, the funds are frozen. They've got it. They found it because the guy had also defrauded somebody else, another victim. What I've got to do is get a lawyer. So I'm getting ready to say, all right, I'm going to reach out and find a lawyer. Okay, wait a second. Who do I know in Hong Kong that's infinitely smarter than me, knows what's going on there? I knew a guy who runs a significant company. Got a hold of me, said, Verne, I'm on it. I'm going to get my CFO. And so the CFO, and we got all these kind of crazy quotes from lawyers about what it would take to recover it. And Derek went over on his own, CFO of a major company, to the police department, talked to him himself, which was fantastic in way of representing us, and was because he lives in Hong Kong, was able to ascertain much better information from that police officer and what's going on with the case, and then ultimately deal with the lawyers we're going to have to deal with than me. And it's always a who question, as Jim Collins says. So I don't care what decision you've got to make, don't make it alone. And that's, I think, one of the lessons.
We really hope you enjoyed this episode of our summer series. Be sure to stay tuned for more best of moments and to learn from the wisdom of our many incredible guests. We drop our podcast episodes weekly into our Facebook group, so be sure to join if you want to stay up to date with our latest resources, announcements, and content. you can join our free Facebook group at Savvy Dentist on Facebook. Just search it there, and we look forward to seeing you in the group.